who's had Harry's song stuck in her head for like a solid week. It's a good one. It's a good one. Welcome to my vlog. I am so enthused about getting back into reading. I have been through a life transition with a new job in the past few weeks, so I have done very little reading, and I'm very excited to finally have settled to where I can get back into all kinds of routines. Also, I just painted my nails for the first time in months. But I never do it regularly, but it makes me so happy, so I should. Love color. Also, I have always had a bad habit of picking my face, so two of the things that help me most are keeping my nails short and keeping them painted so they're thicker, so it's harder to ruin my skin. So another good reason I should start painting my nails more frequently. But yeah, it's already late, so I'm just gonna talk about what I've been doing for quiet time lately, and then we'll get into novels throughout the week. I am currently in 2 groups regularly. The first is a young adult group where we are reading through the book of John, and we just did discussion on John 9. It has been cool because I'm just about actually to finish Mark. So just to see some of that comparison and contrast between the way the books were written and how the different stories that were intersected are told. I feel like I should probably do a more in-depth study of reading them all at once at some point in terms of the 4 Gospels. But for now, I'm just enjoying getting to meditate on Jesus and how Jesus always just gives us the breath of fresh air that is his character. And he does things, but I feel like he does things just to re-emphasize his character. So I just love his character, and so it's always nice to meditate on him. I feel like really all of Scripture is meditating on him, but when Jesus is present, it's all the more reason to focus on God first and foremost, reading through Scripture. So that's been good. And then I'm also in a women's Bible study, and we're going through the book of Timothy, and we actually have a whole workbook as well where we're answering questions. I was gonna read 2 Timothy tonight and probably just answer half the questions. I was in the previous session, which was 6 weeks long, and then this session we had so many people interested in our group that we split the tables, so now I'm leading a table, which I was not doing before, and so I want to make sure I'm reading the passage through several times now before group. So for this week anyway, I'm gonna do half the questions one night, half the questions the next night when I reread it, and then reread it again a third time day of. So yeah, it's been nice. I feel like I always just love the epistolary books, so they feel more introspective and meditative, and that's just naturally who I am as a person. So I am appreciating all of Paul's meditations in this case for Timothy. That's what I'll be reading tonight. And then my supplemental read, my friend gave me this book, Consider the Lilies by Johnny Ardevanis. This book is about anxiety, which I've had for quite a while in my life. But I'm really liking it so far. I've done 3 chapters. The first chapter was just generally statistically talking about how so much of us have despair and anxiety. And just because of the world and the type of world that we live in. The second chapter was more about the idea of peace, and where are we putting our focus, because that a lot of times can frame if we're steeped in anxiety versus feeling more peace. And I liked the idea of using the amount of anxiety you have as one type of barometer towards, okay, maybe I need to be spending extra time in scripture right now because my anxiety is really high. And as you can imagine, just meditating on God's character most times alleviates anxiety, not because it suddenly makes your situations go away, but when we really understand God's character, we know that we'll be okay and that we have the resilience we need. We have the peace offered. We have the temporality perspective on our situation because of the stability of his character. And that's not to like invalidate our mental illness, because I do think a lot of times in Christian context people can talk about anxiety where they're actually just talking about worry, and that's like a whole other discussion, because worry is a cognitive behavior you can redirect, and anxiety is a psychosomatic product of your environment and triggers, and they're just not the same thing. And I kind of get bothered when people try to say that they're the same thing, because they're definitely not. There can be, and there always is, a cognitive behavior component to anxiety, but if it was just cognitive behavior, the physical symptoms don't make sense. Like, it's clearly also chemical and like fight or flight mode and all of that. So what I appreciated was, like, after meditating on where you're focusing and how that can impact you, it then went into chapter 3, which was about physical contributions to anxiety and how it's not wise to say anxiety is just spiritual or that it's just physical, but that it's both. And the reality is, like, your disposition, the way God has naturally wired you, can give you different inclinations towards anxiety, depression, all kinds of mental health concerns, as well as, like, if you have invisible illness and constant pain, like, you're probably going to have a lot more mental struggles than someone who has alleviation from pain. And then also, the one that got me personally was the section on exhaustion and the idea that Elijah asked to die because he was experiencing burnout. And the times when I felt the most amount of despair across the board have been times when I am burnt out. And the idea of, like, I can't see beyond this because I'm so depleted by what I'm going through. And I feel like that very succinctly put into words, like, that's why I was feeling so much despair, because I was so burnt out, because it wasn't just mental exhaustion, but it was physical exhaustion, it was emotional exhaustion, it was social exhaustion, all of the things at once. And that's just overstimulating and overwhelming anyway. But for me, it's like unbearable because I just physically feel everything so deeply. So when all of those things are happening at once, I'm drowning. I'm like, this is too much to feel. And yet my body is attempting to feel it all. And whether it's the cognitive dissonance or the physical effects, like, I can't do it. It's too much. I need alleviation now. And so, yeah. Anyway, that just, like, more simply put to words, just my own struggles, and, like, why anxiety and depression are struggles for me, because of these various factors coming together in a perfect storm for me to have those mental illnesses. That chapter just, like, really put it into an accurate perspective that was really, like, reaffirming that, yeah, mental illness is just very uniquely intentional to who different people are. And it is what it is. But then the best part of all of that with Elijah's story is the idea that God was like, you just need sleep and a snack and you'll be fine. And he was. And it did change everything. Because that is also very relatable. Took a 2-hour nap today. It was great. So yeah, that's spiritually what I'm reading. And I will give you guys more reading updates throughout the week. So yes. It's Anna, special correspondent, reporting to you live at Jesus' funeral. It's Good Friday. I have reading updates and a lot of thoughtfulness to bring about because of what I've been reading. I read 3 books in March. So January, it was like 4 and 5 stars. It was great. And then February slumped and it was 3 stars, which was not so great. And then March was solid 4 stars and solid nonfiction, which was very unlike me and totally unintentional. And I just had my monthly book club where we talked about what we read in March. And I didn't realize they were all nonfiction until I was talking about them all. So I guess I've, I'm just delved into a lot of nonfiction and I'm ready to be back in fiction, which I am now, and I'm very, very happy about it. So the first book that I finished during the month, I also don't have any of these copies right now, sorry, but I will put a photo here. The first book I read was One Day Everyone Will Have Always Been Against This by Omar El Akkad, and this is such an invaluable read. This is by an Egyptian-born journalist who has moved multiple times in his life and now is currently in the United States. But he had so many good meditations to share. It's kind of memoir, so parts of it are about his personal life, but then a lot of it is more so just earnest personal essay. It is about Gaza especially and everything that's been going on for years there with the genocide, and I really like how it critically analyzes Western culture and all of the issues within Western culture that we too often don't question. And so 2 of my favorite chapters in the book, one of them was on journalism. And as someone who studied creative writing, I really, really appreciated this. I was on my newspaper for 3 years at school, and it's so important to be able to find a way to, it's such a challenge, right, to craft something that's not biased. And to some degree, you could argue nothing's ever not biased, but at the same time, like, there's so much integrity in seeking how to be as unbiased as possible, and that's just something we lack as a whole with world events and news as a whole. I feel like everything turns into a marketing ploy and like becomes poisoned by marketing and trying to get people to do something specific. But yeah, I just really appreciated his meditations and how to call back to what journalism is actually supposed to be about, and people, even if they're few and far between, who fight for the integrity of being unbiased. And I just really appreciated that. And there's so much more that we could meditate on with that. But if you have any thoughts on that, please let me know. I would love to continue this conversation because it's all just a bit disheartening and eerie, especially after like rereading The Hunger Games and having a resurgence of Suzanne Collins's work these days, that there's too many parallels with the real world, and how there's censorship and how there's limited information or intentionally left out information. And it's just such an important conversation because it affects so much. And we live in an age where you think you can know when you might be fed things that are all not true. The other thing that I really, really loved was his scrutiny of Western politics, and especially in the United States, because both the Republican Party and the Democrat Party have so many issues. And what I really appreciated that it emphasized was the idea that by trying so hard to just not be the other, there's no focus on actually being neighbors to anyone. If the goal of politics starts becoming just like not being the other, you're not actually doing things to help people who need help. If it becomes more about argumentation, which it is, at least in the current state of things, nothing's actually getting done that needs to be done. And I think especially on a spiritual level, that's really heartbreaking to really reckon with that idea that like politics has become not really even about ethics or morals or protocols anymore, but it's more just about opposing something, because it's just tinged with pride, it's just tinged with otherness. And I know that, like, you know, if you believe in a God that is above politics, like, you already know that, but I think other people are starting to realize that as well. And it just as a whole, even with like social media and everything, all these corporations just end up pushing us towards opposition, and it's just so fake and not real that we have so much opposition among one another. But they so desperately want us to believe that, when in reality we have so much in common, we have so many morals that we're all fighting for. We just think it should be looked at from a different perspective. And it's just a tragedy that the structures that are in place in Western culture distract us from so many truths that are exacerbated by the way that we are also isolated from people opposing us in real life, beyond the screen, beyond the news. People have just siloed so far that, like, not only are you sitting in the lies that these news streams are feeding you, but you're also not even touching the people like you should be interacting with to combat the lies that it's feeding you. And this has been a frustration of mine in church, like big worldwide church as a whole, or maybe more so just the Western church as a whole. This idea that we have this head knowledge of everyone's value, and yet there's so many people practically who, so many believers just like don't even touch with a 10-foot pole for I don't even know what reasons. But there has to be more application at some point. If you really believe something, if you really believe in the integrity of every neighbor that you have, then we should be regularly rubbing up against them in real life and not just judging them through news outlets, through current events, through politics. And that's where I've just found real interpersonal relationships to be so stabilizing against all these divisions that other people I know just like look in on rather than are actually participate in. So those are all my thoughts for right now, but please jump in if you have any more thoughts, because very important conversation. I would recommend it to pretty much everyone, regardless of what you think of the actual like world events that are occurring, because I feel like this has more to do with questioning what narratives you're being bombarded with every day, and questioning the structures that are shaping how you even form opinions. And I think that's just really important. And I think that anyone who enjoys reading enjoys ways that they can continue to think critically. So, highly recommend. Um, it really also convicted me practically to get in the news regularly. I feel like a lot of people may fall into the opposite, where they are like so discouraged by news, but I feel like for the vast majority of my life I've been very ignorant of and separated from news, and I feel like if I am an ambassador of Christ that is in this world, like how privileged and selfish of me to stay in a bubble and not um, reach the people in pain, or even acknowledge the pain that people are going through. And so I'm more so feeling really strongly that I need to be more involved on grand scale things in the world, because I want to not just pray for my life or the people in my life, but I want to pray for the world. And I think news, even if I'm suspicious of it being biased or whatever, I think it can always be a springboard to pray for everyone at large, and countries at large, and people groups at large. So that is my goal for myself now, is to be more engaged in the entire world and not just my corner of the world. The next book that I read was Disney High by Ashley Spencer. I previously heard all of Alison Stoner's podcast that was out a couple years ago, regularly coming out, and so a lot of this book was familiar to me through that podcast, and I would highly recommend listening to that podcast if you haven't. This was structured very similarly to the Mars Hill podcast that I listened to the end of 2024, beginning of 2025. I find it really sociologically interesting, especially from a Christian perspective, to analyze structures that collapse, because spiritually, I believe that like if structures and or motives under the structures developing is not godly, like it will collapse. But also it's just fascinating to study like the exact things that make them collapse. In Mars Hill case, it was, manipulation and abuse of power, and lack of accountability, and all these things. Disney High follows the narrative of Disney Channel from Lizzie McGuire all the way to Sunny with a Chance. And I thought that was an interesting window of the channel to analyze, because it starts with kind of unquestioning allegiance and loyalty to the business, versus with Demi Lovato we see like the culmination of mental collapse because of the amount of pressure put on kids by a business that should just not be the case. Kids should not be part of a business. Kids should not be signing onto a business. I think it's so strange that we have general working age rules for all kinds of work, but yet when it comes to entertainment, like we can somehow like say, just kidding, we don't have those rules. That's really weird to me. First of all, that there's like that weird discrepancy and inconsistency there, but it's also like these people are so far from having their prefrontal cortex developed, and you're really telling me it's fine that they sign onto a business deal when they do not understand the full implications of a business deal, and they do not understand like the longevity of a business deal. Like their lives have been so short up until this point, and you're expecting them to make a really long commitment that their minds can't even fathom, because they've never had a commitment like that before. And there's just like a severe lack of business literacy there. Not that like it's on them. I think they just shouldn't even be put in that position to begin with. But I understand the whole idea of like, well, kids want to watch kids. But like, I don't know. I don't know. It's like, but surely kids can be entertained with like cartoons instead, or even like podcasts, magazines, you know. Does it really have to be through children on TV or in movies? I don't know. And there was also some racism ideas that made me really mad throughout the shows. Like they wanted to focus on expanding diversity, which is an admirable goal when you want to make sure that kids can identify with what they're watching. But there were multiple times with Leilani from Lizzie McGuire and Vanessa Hudgens with High School Musical, where these characters' actual ethnicity was not the ethnicity of their characters. And so, in these different cases with the actresses, like they're having to portray an experience that's literally not their experience. Like, sure, if you want to highlight a specific ethnicity, that makes sense if it aligns with your goals, but then hire someone who's actually that ethnicity, because otherwise you're just upholding racial stereotypes that are not even true. These ethnicities are not homogenous. These are very distinct people with very distinct identities. And if any of these people are spiritual, Christian to any degree, it's like, you dare try to combine the diversity of God's Imago Dei? Like, what are you doing? It made me so mad. There were some cool moments too, though, where the kids stepped into their autonomy. One of my favorite moments was when Dylan Sprouse was running a scene with Kim Rhodes, who was Zach and Cody's mom in The Sweet Life, and he was supposed to say a line about her gaining weight, I believe. He kept not saying the line because he didn't want to, and the people producing it kept stopping the scene and saying, "You need to say your line." And finally he was like, "No, I would not say that to my mom, and I'm not going to say that to Kim." And I thought that was awesome. First of all, to their actual mom, that she raised them that way, but also that they, despite being pressured to do something unethical, decided, even as minors, like, no, I'm not going to bend to inappropriate behavior just because you feel like you have power over me to tell me what to do. If it's not right, I'm not going to do it. And then I ended the month with The Tearjerker, which was Tuesdays with Morrie by Mitch Albom. This was the book that was on my 2026 TBR. It was a nice short size. I also just found the 1999 film adaptation because I keep meaning to look after I read something to see if it has an adaptation. Turns out this is the first book that I've read this year that has one. So I'll probably be watching that at some point. But Tuesdays with Morrie is a memoir following Mitch and Morrie, and Mitch had Morrie when he was in college as a professor, and then they lost touch after graduation, and then this is like definitely spoilers, so like if you want to read it, maybe don't listen to this part of the video. Wait until you see me holding up a book and like skip to that part, because I don't think I can make official chapters yet on my channel. Yeah, so Morrie was diagnosed with ALS, and so he deteriorated really fast, but then he also got to be on this show where they were talking about his life because they wanted to interview him. They found his career fascinating. And so Mitch was like just surfing TV and came across that interview with Morrie and was like, "Oh my gosh, I feel like I need to reconnect with Morrie. And I feel horrible that I disconnected for so long, and now he is, nearing the end of his life." And so they reconnect, and the beautiful part is like Morrie acts like no time has passed. He doesn't hold the disconnection against Mitch at all. And I really like how the book is structured like a college course. So like it starts with syllabus and it goes through like this lesson and this lesson. And so it was this idea that like Mitch
wrote down all of these topics that he wanted counsel on because Maury, despite nearing the end of life, wanted to still be living instead of just giving up because his body was giving up. And so he gradually, over the weeks and months, went through the list of topics that Mitch wanted to hear his insight and wisdom on, and he got to maintain his professorial role for Mitch until the very end of his life. And it was very sweet and emotional and just great, sobering reminders that we need about our existence, and to not wait until it's too late to tell people how much you value them, and to show up for people and do life with people, and what is actually worth the time. And especially in our information age where we're constantly numbed through our phones, it was a really good reminder of like what will actually stick with you from your life at the end. And that's such a great reminder of how to live it today and tomorrow and each day that has been laid out before us. So I really liked the perspectives it offered. One of the best portions I thought was on aging, and Maury's perspective was so refreshing against our culture that hates aging with every fiber of its being. I think that section especially has aged so well the longer the book has been out. And this idea that age is what it is. It's not like you can't be envious about something like aging when it's not a competition. It's just how life goes. And you also can't be envious about something when you've already been where people who are younger than you have already been, right? Um, it's the idea of like, can you really be envious of something when you've already had it before? But also, just because you're old doesn't mean that you can't still tap into all the ages that you've been. It was just very, very refreshing and a joy to read. And I would definitely recommend, if you haven't already read it, though I do feel a ton of people have already read it for good reason. And maybe a lot of people do read it for school as well. I never had to. So those were the nonfiction books that I read in March. And now that I've started my April reading, I am in the most beautiful book, The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. So I read A Little Princess last year and I thought it was just okay. I didn't love it. And so I was a little apprehensive to pick up another of her books, but I'm already loving it so much, and definitely much more than A Little Princess. It is peak spring vibes, which is exactly what I'm searching for as I discover what spring vibes even mean to me. It's on a moor, it's set among all this beautiful nature, and it's super windy, and that just feels like spring to me. I really like that it's kind of a slower pacing to just soak in the nature as it comes, but it's not so dry that you're like hating sitting in the nature. I don't know. It's somehow the perfect medium. The fact that the setting is also very intentional and necessary to the plot going on. So if you don't know, this follows our protagonist Mary as she goes off to Misselthwaite Manor following the cholera outbreak. She loses her loved ones to death, and the themes in this book are very much about growth and flourishing, just like spring, just like gardens, and just like Mary is already starting to. Yeah, it's like make it Jane Austen, but more about nature and more about internal growth than romance. And I just really appreciate how it's it's quiet, but what speaks the loudest is the joy of the nature. I'm really, really enjoying this, and I'm definitely going to be reading more every day in the next week. My goal is to read a book-ish a week, and this is so small that it's easy to do. Also, the gold edging is just so pretty, and I love all the little gold pieces in the front. Yeah, so thanks for listening to all my updates. I will try to give you more B-roll, and consistent Secret Garden updates if you are interested. I feel like I haven't fixated on one singular book in my meditations in a while, so that's what I'm gonna do. So see you soon.
Hi friends, so I'm back home. One of our local coffee shops had a mobile bookstore outside in a little trailer, which is where I showed a teeny bit of b-roll, and they had a pretty good selection for being so tiny. There were some children's books, there was mystery, romance, some fiction. They had fantasy too, so it was a really good array of stories, and I ended up getting a used $5 copy of Gone Girl, which I have yet to read. Come to find out, when I got home, I noticed it had mold in it that I did not first see, so it makes sense that it was that cheap. But I put it in the freezer to kill the bacteria, and will take care of it enough to read it, but then practically I probably won't keep it just because I don't really want that around my other books. But yes, I'm looking forward to that. I've had 0 spoilers of Gone Girl, which feels crazy, so I'm looking forward to that. I might pick that up in the fall, so we'll see. So I've read more of The Secret Garden now, and Mary has met Dickon, and she just met Mr. Craven, and is really just starting to feel more settled and more at home at Misselthwaite. And she's bonded a lot more with Martha, which is cool. I also just think it's funny spiritually that they're Mary and Martha. And I really like that her and Dickon are starting to make the secret garden come alive with the plants. I really like that there are layers of themes of making things flourish again and reinvigorating things that have been dead, whether it's the garden or relationships or the spirits of the people on the property. I really like that idea. It is very spring-esque, so I'm still really enjoying the vibes, and I'm excited to read some more. I'm about to go to bed, but I wanted to tell you guys that I finished The Secret Garden. I know the secret. I really enjoyed this. I gave it 4 stars. I think it's a really good children's book. It functions in its genre really effectively. I know my mom friends either love it or would love it. It teaches really good lessons about changing your perspective, changing your attitude, which I know a lot of young kids need, and finding the balance between serving others as a child, but also finding your own autonomy as a child among your peers, and figuring out what you enjoy doing, and just cultivating skills and hobbies that you enjoy. I like how this book is the epitome of spring, and it bears all of the verbs and the words that are associated with spring, whether it's cultivate, grow, flourish, bloom, not just because there's a garden, but you really see the characters come into themselves. It was such a joy to see Colin come into himself, and I was so psychologically happy that they mentioned him being a hypochondriac at the end, because he was, and I wasn't sure like psychologically if it was going to be that modern, so I appreciated that, and it was really cool to see him find his joy of living, versus despair or anxiety, but also living despite fear of nourishment, and really like deciding to stop abandoning yourself, which is a very huge concept for a child. So like I don't think Colin as a character would literally understand all of that, but as an adult, like I had to do a lot of that growth and work myself, and a lot of times the unhealth can come out in your relationship with food, and so I had to like grow and work through all of that myself now in adulthood. And so it was really cool to see him have such a deeper psychological experience than I was expecting with the world around him and the relationships around him, and really learn what it is to have confidence in himself. There were some really deep themes there, and I appreciate that unlike A Little Princess, it wasn't just a saccharine story, but it was genuinely a deep story, emotionally, mentally, and physically, and I definitely liked this more than A Little Princess. I think it goes a lot farther, and I think that's probably why it's generally more popular and considered her work more than A Little Princess or her other works. It was just delightful, and I love this cover still. I will never get over this cover. I really liked how there was some spirituality thrown in. I don't think Frances Hodgson Burnett was definitively Christian, but she really liked a lot of spirituality, and so the doxology was thrown in there, which was unexpected and cool. But there was this moment where she was talking about moments in life when you feel like things will go on forever and ever, or rather they will, and that felt very God-esque to me. So even if she wasn't, there was definitely a lot of God floating around this story, I thought, which was cool. I thought it was very spiritual how Colin's father returned and reunited with Colin, and it was so cool. It was so cool to see even just the hope that the kids gave the adults just by observation. And that also goes with my quiet time today, because I'm reading through 1 Timothy for a Bible study I'm in, and it was chapter 4 where it talks about Paul's writing to Timothy and saying, don't let anyone look down on you because you're young, but set an example for the believers. And he lists out all this conduct for Timothy, but I think this is a really good example of that sentiment as well, of like some people can really downplay the power of youth in the ways that it can teach people older. And yeah, I think the zeal that Mary and Dickon and Colin had was very revitalizing to the adults around them, and I feel like that goes along with the freshness and the refreshment of spring, that sometimes we can grow so stale to our routines. We can just forget the blessings and the zeal that we can tap into any given day, and kids are such great reminders of that, whether you're a parent or whether you're just an adult like me without a child. We can always learn from people younger than us, even when we don't feel like we have the same capacity for energy always, as I was feeling when I was with a bunch of college-age kids this past weekend for Easter. Our energy capacities may change and oscillate more as we get older, but we still have capacity for wonder in all of its excitement. And if you forget that, just read The Secret Garden, or, you know, tap into just taking time to observe the people around you and how they do that, and how they do that well, or how they're even able to access that feeling of wonder in their daily life. So if you don't already, I would encourage you to try to find someone who inspires you to be more wondrous, because we can all use it. Right, Nugget? Or maybe it's a pet. Maybe a pet is a good reminder for you too. I know Nugget is for me. So with that being said, thank you so much for joining this reading vlog. I hope you enjoyed my thoughts on The Secret Garden if you've read it before, and I'm looking forward to digging into my other reads this month. I am definitely committed to my reading because of the other more productive or stressful things flying around in my life. So this has been such a nice reprieve to unwind after stress or just general busyness. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the next book I'm heading into, and I will bid you good night now because I'm so tired. I'm shocked that I even recorded this. But I hope you're doing well wherever you're at, and I will talk to you soon. Bye, friends.